the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Paul Clancy. Paul is an MD, MBA student here at the Darden School of Business, and he is also spending his summer as part of the iLab. I recently caught up with Paul to talk more about his background, his decision to pursue an MBA, what he's enjoyed about his Darden experience, his advice for prospective students, and more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the Experience Darden podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my interview with Paul Clancy. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brett.
Well, it's great to talk with you. How's everything going? How are you doing?
I'm doing really great. I just was able to travel back home here in Michigan, so a little break from the Virginia summer right now, and getting to spend time with my partner and friends and family. So while working on my virtual internship, which I'm sure we'll get to talking about. So
Yeah, for
overall,
sure.
having a great time.
That's great to hear. And thank you so much for taking some time to come on the podcast. So tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you and what's your background?
Yeah, so my name is Paul Clancy. I'm a native Michigander, born and raised in a little town called South Lyon, a little outside of Ann Arbor. And I'm actually a dual degree, fifth year now, MD, MBA student. So I'm getting my medical and business degrees. I went to Michigan State for undergrad and was pulled over to UVA for med school. And then, as I'm sure we'll get to talking, I then decided to do Darden, so I added one extra year on, and now I'm in my last year of the program and excited to graduate about a little under a year from now. So kind of whole life figured I'd be a doctor. Well, I figured I'd be an engineer and then switched to medicine. And now we've added business into the mix. So got the whole trifecta here.
How did you decide that you wanted to do the dual degree? I always wonder about that, right? Business school is in addition to your medical schooling. Medical school is a lot for people. So how did you decide you wanted to do even more school?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because if you had talked to me back when I was even in the first year of medical school, especially undergrad, I would have laughed you off and been like, no way, business to me meant you were like an accountant. I didn't really know anything about business. I never taken a business class, did not have any family or friends that did business. Everyone I knew was pretty much STEM focused only. So it was a very nebulous concept. And what kind of started me thinking about it was getting to medical school, especially getting to clerkships, which is a part of medical school where you get to work in the hospital with different physicians and team members. And I started to realize that a lot of the decision making wasn't actually made by physicians, it was made by executives and administrators who oftentimes didn't have that medical background. And so many of the complex medical decisions we were making weren't always based on medical care itself. It might be based on logistical concerns or operations or financial issues. And I realized that this was such an impactful part of medicine that I had no clue about. And medicine also did not prepare you at all for that. So I think I started wanting to learn more about exactly how those decisions get made and what goes into that. And then on top of that, I also started, just listening to a lot of business podcasts. Shout out Acquired FM if anyone's heard of that. It's great. They do like these super in-depth dives of businesses. And I started realizing I was actually really interested in this kind of stuff. And I thought it was super, super cool. And just looking at my kind of educational pathway, I was at that time I had 2 years left of medical school, then would do residency. And looking ahead, I'm like, well, I'll finish residency after working 8 hours a week, and then I'll be in my 30s and want to start a family. And I'm not going to have a ton of free time as a physician. And so I didn't feel like I was going to have the ability to learn about this stuff on my own. And so Darden provided the perfect opportunity to give me dedicated time in a world-class environment to learn, from the best and brightest, while also letting me continue with my medical career. So it kind of was a perfect storm. And I luckily happened to be at UVA, which has, the number one best public business school in the country. So that was a very happy coincidence. And that after that, I just started talking to more people, being able to travel down to Darden or travel 10 minutes down the street to Darden, talk to the admissions, talk to faculty. And the more I learned about, the more I was like, this is the place for me. And here I am.
So I'm curious, how does business school compare to medical school? Are they similar? Are they different from one another? How do they compare?
It is exceptionally different. My friend he did the program a year above me, so he just graduated. He kind of described it as not in the same galaxy, which I thought was a very apt description. I think in terms of the academic side, the way we approach learning is just so different. In medical school, most of my education was done through flashcards. And I kind of joke that, Brett, if you wanted to be a doctor, if you did a few 100,000 flashcards, you too could have very similar knowledge base to what I have. And there is obviously that degree of understanding. You have to have a good foundational understanding of medicine, but there is also a larger degree of just memorization, especially if you have to do all these standardized exams and all that rigmarole. But then at Darden, we have this case-based method, which is a very, very interesting. I actually really enjoyed it, but it just was different to approach class in a way where, you're going to do the preparation, but there's not a right answer. And then discussion can kind of go however you want, however the professor and the class kind of shape it. And again, it's just very different from medicine where in medicine, you'll get kind of, here is what we're going for. We need to get you to that point. When in business, there could be 10 different ways to approach a problem. And, half of them might be very valid. And there might be numerous examples of that working where, if you have pneumonia, there's only so many things we're going to do to treat that pneumonia. Right. And I also think from the culture, it's a very different kind of hierarchy almost. And I'm lucky because UVA Medical School is an amazing program. And we have I'm biased. I think we have one of the best cultures in medicine. We have just a great relationship between faculty and medical students, but there is still that discrepancy between, when you're a junior medical student, you're talking to an attending physician. There's a very ingrained level of, respect, and you're always going to defer to them. When in business school, there's a wide different variety of ages and experiences. And, all the professors are very, very cordial. I've been go to my professor's house and I'll have a beer with them and stuff. And that just doesn't happen so much in medicine. So that's been interesting also to be exposed to that type of culture and see how it's similar in some ways, but then different in others.
Yeah, I was curious about the adjustment to being in business school. I mean, one of the adjustments typically for folks is getting back into school mode, but you've been in medical school, right? So that's not maybe as big of a change. But I'm sure there are other things that have come up as you've gotten used to being a Darden student.
Yeah, yeah. So you're right. That's funny. Talking to a lot of my friends, they're like, "Oh, I have to study again." I'm not in the workforce. For me, I went to medical school right after I graduated, so I've never been in the workforce. Which is one of my classmates one time in class was like, "Paul, shut up! Like you've never actually worked a job." That was a pretty good comeback to something I said. But so academically wise, I was like, "This is, if anything, was even maybe a little." Easier for me because I was used to, especially what I just came off of in medicine before starting at Darden, was you're working like 10-hour days and then coming home and studying hours and hours on top of that. So starting at Darden was just a very different experience. And I will say for me, I didn't do a traditional recruiting pathway, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So that also gave me a lot more free time and flexibility compared to a lot of my peers. But I think there was a lot of transitions. One of the biggest was realizing that within Darden, kind of like the whole shtick of business school is those connections you're making, the lifelong friendships you're developing. And there's so many opportunities to get involved, both academically with like, doing all the cases and doing these professional clubs, but there's so many, I can't think of the word, but like, the fun clubs and all the social activities and the get togethers and stuff like that. And I feel like it was easy at the beginning of Darn to say, "Oh, I have other stuff I want to work on," and neglecting that. But then realizing that that is why we're here at Darden, and that's a very important part of the informal education to go to all those things and to meet those people and make build those friendships. And so I think that's one of the transitions I made is getting out of that medical mindset where I'm like, oh, if I'm not studying and being productive, I'm losing out. When it's like, well, the whole point of business school is to meet people who are going to be able to make an impact in your life. So I need to devote my time and energy to doing that. And again, it's kind of crazy that I've only been here a year, but even within the first 4 months of Darden, I realized I had a group of friends who like are going to be at lifelong friends, people who will be in my wedding. And it's just amazing you can come to an environment that quickly and meet such an awesome group of people. And I think that just speaks to kind of the quality of students that Darden attracts.
You mentioned feeling like a lot of the medical decisions ultimately are driven by business considerations, and that's what got you thinking about pursuing an MBA. But how do your career goals fit in here? What were you thinking in terms of what you'd like to do from a career standpoint as you entered Darden?
Yeah, so I have a few different routes I could see myself going. And I will, in case any medical people will say that listen to this, I will, will clarify that most decisions we do make, for everyone that's listening to this, it's also a patient. A lot of the decisions we do make in medicine are based on the actual healthcare component, but unfortunately, there are just those financial considerations. You can't give everyone a full body, CT scan. Not that we would do that, but there's things like that that do have an impact. But don't, anyone listening to this, don't worry that it's like, oh, you're getting crappy care just because some suit up in the C-suite decided not to. I try to be a little less cynical than that. But kind of thinking my long-term career goals, I fallen in love with anesthesiology. So I would love to put people to sleep and also wake them back up, which is an important part. And so I'm still going to be going to residency after I graduate. And so I'll graduate next year. I'll have a 4-year residency program, hopefully going back to my home in the Midwest. And then from there, I think I always want to practice anesthesiology in some capacity. I think the first few years as an attending physician, which is kind of like that senior level physician, I do want to be a full-time anesthesiologist just to make sure I get that experience and get the ability to practice my skills so I can be the most effective doctor I can be. And I think a little bit later, middle to later career, I think I want to branch out to doing part-time clinical practice and then use kind of the MBA talents on other things. And I think this is very subject to change. Right now, I'm really interested in entrepreneurship. So I'm actually working, which again, I'm sure we'll talk about, but with this incubator for a nonprofit called Admissions Academy. So we're helping provide more resources for disadvantaged pre-medical and medical students to increase equity throughout the admissions process. And so, mentorship and education is something I've always been very passionate about. So I think I could really use my MBA platform to help increase the kind of reach we have and the impact we're able to make. I'm really interested in the role of effective leadership in organizations. And so especially within healthcare, you are at the core part of a team. And so, being able to be in an effective team and have effective leadership can quite frankly save lives if you're able to create a more effective environment. So I think doing healthcare leadership would be something I'm very interested in. And then there's just such a variety of opportunities out there of like, doing chief medical officer for companies or getting involved in, biotech. Um, I think we're seeing now as a country the rise of idea of lifestyle medicine, preventative medicine, and the role that has and the way we approach medical care. That's also something I'm very passionate in within medicine. So thinking about how can we use a big reach to help maybe educate our country on healthcare best practices and how to maintain healthy lifestyles. So those honestly like so many opportunities within the dual degree, and it's something that was also been really cool to be at Darden, just to get exposed to different people and see all the roles that are out there. Because from my background growing up, to be successful meant you were a doctor, lawyer, engineer. Again, didn't know anything about business, didn't know some of these jobs even existed. So learning more and more about what's actually out there and the impact you're able to make with some of these positions has been super interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious about that nonprofit focused on the admissions process. What was the inspiration for that? Where did that idea come from?
Yeah, so I'm the actual first person in my family to go to medical school, and I'll be the first physician once I graduate. And the process sucks, frankly. For anyone going through it, there's just so many hoops to jump through. You have to, basically, it feels like you have to be perfect. You have to get a great GPA. You have to do really well in the MCAT, which is this big test covering like all the medical topics. You have to do, volunteering and shadowing. You have to have some sort of personal brand. Then you have to do well on all your essays and interviews. And so there's all these barriers that make it really hard for students to get through it. And actually, if you look at the data that's put out by the kind of governing body that handles all the medical applications, um, 80% of successful people who apply and then matriculate to medical school come from the top 20% of income. And so everyone else that doesn't have what really amounts to like thousands of dollars for private tutoring and advising, it just makes it that much more difficult to get through that process. And then you have just this huge disadvantage that students face, and the resulting kind of lack of diversity in different perspectives we end up getting in medicine. And so I was able to kind of go through that process, and obviously I made it here, so did something right. But I learned so much stuff, and so much of what I was learning were things that were relatively simpler, straightforward, but just I had no one there to tell me. I had no mentors or no peers that could help me with that. And so what actually started out was I just made, after taking the MCAT, made a Reddit post of here's my experience. And that got like a ton of upvotes and comments and people saying, hey, this like made a huge deal for my overall application. And I just realized that there was a lot of people out there that could benefit from that kind of thing. And so for the last few years, I was a private tutor and advisor. And I've been working on kind of building a curriculum to take all these things that you would get in one-on-one advising and tutoring and make it into a more scalable and accessible format for students. So the ultimate goal is that any pre-medical student across the country or even high school student that thinks they want to be a doctor someday, they can have access to admissionsacademy.org at a free option. And that will help walk them through what they need to do to get into medical school. And that's right now just for pre-medical students, but we also have plans to expand to medical students as well. So once you get into medical school, it's a whole nother ball game of like, well, great, you're here, but now what? Right now, those all these other kind of new things you have to get through. So helping medical students get through that, and eventually expand to other graduate programs such as business with the MBA, law, nursing programs such as that. So it's been super exciting to work on it. I'm actually been able to win a few grants through Darden through iLab, as well as getting the iLab incubator program I'm working on full time this summer, which is a mostly virtual program. So that's what I was doing right before this meeting, was working on some of that. And it's just been really gratifying to hear back from students like, hey, I didn't know what to do. I used Admissions Academy and I got this amazing score. And now I feel so much more confident preparing for applications, especially when it comes from people who might have been in my shoes where they might be the first person to be a doctor in their family. And it's just been a really awesome experience overall.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm curious, you mentioned even providing eventually support for folks as they go through medical school. What are some of the things that people don't know about, but they should know about, when they get into medical school that people maybe feel like at a deficit compared to some of their peers who might be a little bit more in the know?
Yeah. The three biggest things we often see. The first is a problem that's endemic to all of education is learning how to learn effectively, right? So a lot of people go through school and, maybe you're good at school or you're not good at school, but most people feel like they have this just natural knack for it. We all know people who maybe they feel like they work really hard, but they're just not able to get the results that they want. On the flip side, people who do great and it's like, oh, well, they're just smart, they can just do well. And I think that's unfortunate, a pretty harming mindset. And because you have people who go through our education system and say, well, I'm just not a good student. I'm just not good at math or XYZ or subject. And they kind of relegate themselves to a role where they can't actually perform that well. And I think in many cases, it's not a matter of someone being naturally dumb or naturally smart. It's a matter of knowing what tools and methods you need to use to learn effectively. And if they can actually utilize that, they can do really well. And that's something we actually do see in medical school, but you think, okay, you got to medical school, you're just like, you must know everything, how to do everything perfect. But what we do see in actually a lot of students is you get to medical school and maybe you're able to get by enough in pre-med without really knowing exactly what to do. And you maybe have some natural knack for it that you get there. And then, med school is that much harder and that much higher, level of content. And so then it becomes very overwhelming to actually get through all that stuff. So I think just learning how to learn is one of the biggest things. And then on top of that, once you get to the second part of medical school, you're on rotations, you're working in a bunch of different settings. Oftentimes, every couple of weeks, you're switching to a whole new clinical environment. That transition can be very difficult for students. And a lot of the skills that you need to perform well in that isn't so much, have you memorized the textbook and do you know all the details? It's can you work well in a team and do you have really good situational awareness? And can you help anticipate the patient's needs and help, can you connect with the family well and get to really know your patients on a personal level? And those are more like personal soft skills that, Darden does a great job kind of helping bring that out of us. But skills a lot of students might not have been able to practice that much. And so helping students with a lot of that, it's almost funny how when I look at my feedback and evaluations, so much of the positive feedback it was, Paul's a very friendly person and Paul tries his best and tries to be helpful. And most people weren't saying, oh, Paul had that textbook memorized and he knew every single question we asked him. Because frankly, a lot of times they didn't. And Darden's kind of the same way, where they might ask questions in class, and I've gotten many a question wrong, or might not have known how to proceed. But it's more like the effort of that you're trying and you're putting your best foot forward. So it's kind of the same thing within the medical system of having that mindset and approaching it the right way can make a big difference. And then the only other minor one is just having that foresight to look at the next 4 years of your education and planning out how you want to approach it, what activities you're going to be involved in, what research you're going to do. Things like that, that a lot of people just don't really think that far ahead. Again, it's so difficult. Most people just focus on the next step forward. But having the foresight to know what's going to be expected of you in a couple of years when you apply to residency can make a big difference on how you approach your medical school experience.
Yeah, I always think about, particularly even with the business school admissions process, people don't know what they don't know, right?
Exactly.
And there's so much out there on the internet, which, people always think, oh, I'll just Google it. I'm not sure how helpful that is, to be honest with you, because you can get all kinds of different opinions, people saying exact opposite things with great certainty. And oh man, where do you get started? Like it can be very overwhelming.
Mhm. That's exactly right, and the other problem with the internet is you don't always know the source of the information you're getting from, and what it really boils down to, which is crazy, is a lot of the stuff is just random YouTube videos and threads on Reddit, and, a Reddit thread, I've looked at many a Reddit thread in my time, and they've been very helpful, but that person on the other side of the computer could be spouting complete nonsense. You don't really know. There's no really way to verify that information. Um, but it's very evident even within Darden where you look at, let's say, consulting recruiting, which is I know a lot of people listening to this podcast might be interested in doing consulting or banking. And you look at the outcomes, and there's some students who do amazingly well and have three for three offers from some of the top firms and really get a lot of the results they wanted. Other students who also work very hard and are very intelligent that don't get those results. And so it's obviously something that's different between those two groups. Is a big component of luck involved. But there are a lot of things we can boil down within in any system like this of the people who are doing something, they're doing something right, and they're lessons we can take away and give to other people. And so kind of my life mission now is to figure out what those lessons are and how can we share those with people just to make it more of a level playing field. Because at the end of the day, I could give you the step-by-step path to get whatever you wanted. And you still have to do the work. And a lot of people just aren't going to do that work. But I at least think being able to provide people a roadmap of what to do is pretty nice. It's something that I would have appreciated when I went through it, right? So why not?
And you're right, the opportunity to be kind of like a vetted source, right? You know that if it's coming from this source that, you can trust it, you can rely upon it. To your point, you don't always know who's on the other end of those conversations on Reddit or whatever your internet source might be.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what's it been like being in the iLab this summer?
iLab has been really, really cool. So for those who aren't familiar, iLab is the program is connected to Darden and then also to the Batten Institute. Batten Institute is kind of I think, cross UVA community institute for entrepreneurship. And so they work with the Darden, Graduate School of Business. They work with the McIntyre School of Commerce and some of the other schools within UVA as a whole. And so they basically have this mostly virtual program that runs through the summer. So we have a combination of these synchronous sprint weeks where in 2 weeks I'm going to go back to Virginia to get to be in person with people, and then a combination of time to just be able to work on your venture nonprofit and get support from people. And I've just been continually amazed by the level of resources and the quality of people we get to work with. And again, this has kind of been my experience with Darn as a whole. Is just like shocking how much is out there and how much people want to help you. But iLab has been giving me so many resources of kind of roadmaps of like what to do tactically. So it's like, hey, if you were about personal branding, here's a slide deck, and here's what we do, and here's an example of how to actually, succeed in pitch competitions. And at the same time, we have a lot of events where you get to meet. We have designated entrepreneurs in residence, which are kind of like mentors who have professional experience. And for example, I just met with one last week who was amazingly helpful. He has a really impressive work background, and I talked to him about what I was working on with the Missions Academy, and he's like, "Well, here's these three people I know that you should talk to, and I'll connect you, and I'll think about this and think about how I can further help you." And it's like, that is amazingly valuable. And to just have tons of people who are like that in the iLab and Darden as a whole who just like want to do everything they can to help you, it's been like holy moly, it makes such a difference just us trying to work on something, and especially within the startup world where it's not like a cut and dry thing and no one's telling you what to do. You kind of have to make it make your own pathway through that. So to have like those mentors, that alone would like make it way more than the cost of admission, which is nothing because they're actually paying me to get to work on this, which is another amazing thing that something I was going to work on anyway because I'm passionate about it. I actually am able to get paid to do that, which also provides funding to be able to support the project before getting revenue. So it's overall been a really really good experience.
So what's next for you? Obviously, you got another year. You've got second year at Darden to look forward to. What are you excited about?
Yeah, so with and again, my schedule is a little different than most people watching this with that dual degree. So I just finished actually before we started the iLab one of my last rotations at UVA Medical School. So as of now, I'm almost basically done with all of my credits in medical school. So my education this next year, though I haven't gotten my medical degree yet, it's almost all Darden stuff. However, I was able to actually front load some of my Darden credits, and so within Darden, we have that core curriculum for the first 3 quarters. After that, it's all elective based, and we have a lot of flexibility to pick, what classes you wanna do, both in the types of classes and the times of the classes, and those also further opportunities to do independent electives with professors. And so, because I really took advantage of that, I have a, pretty heavy fall semester load, but after the fall semester, my spring semester is very, very light. And so what that does is it will give me time to apply to residency. So that's going to be a fun process I get to go through of, doing all my essays and doing all those interviews for different programs, different anesthesiology programs across the Midwest. So that will take up some of my time. But then after that, I'll have a lot of free time. This lets me pretty much just focus on Admissions Academy full time. So I'm going to be want to take as much advantage of the resources Darden has to offer me, and the mentors that we talked about to get to keep working on Admissions Academy, keep on growing it, building partnerships with different institutions, and also just kind of enjoy my life and get to travel, see friends and family before I start residency, where my time will be much more structured. I don't have that kind of flexibility that I have right now as a student.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, you obviously working on Admissions Academy this summer. You got all these resources, you got mentors, other folks you can tap into. What does it look like? The work that you're doing, your day to day. Like, what's your schedule? You just kind of give people a little bit of a sense of what it's like to work on a startup during the summer.
Yeah, and again, with this startup, because it's, basically similar to a SaaS company, which is software as a service, so it's a kind of scalable online course. This is gonna look very different than, for example, my friend Jake, who's working on a, skincare product that has a physical packaging, right? But with Admissions Academy, we're kind of splitting my time between working on the actual product itself. And so Admissions Academy right now is an online course, starting with text-based format, but then expanding to videos. There's actually already a course out there. So if you or anyone you know is a pre-medical student and you go to admissionsacademy.org, you can access our free pre-med essentials course. So something that was recently launched. And so that has basically kind of a step-by-step high-level roadmap of what do you need to do as a pre-med, how do you approach the MCAT, things like that. And right now I'm working on making a comprehensive complete course that has super, super step-by-step actionable, like, okay, first you're gonna do this, then you're gonna do this, and here's, an email template, and here's a spreadsheet template, and things like that to fully walk you through every single thing you need to do to be a successful pre-medical student. So working on that right now. And then the other half of my time, or yeah, around half of it is spent on the actual outreach and partnerships. And so right now, our goal is to expand to pre-medical students across the country. So we've mostly started with UVA or Virginia pre-med groups and pre-med institutions. So those we actually have a lot of undergrad universities in Virginia, which is nice. There's a ton of different pre-med groups. So I've been working on meeting with group leadership, saying, hey, I have this free resource. I want to expand it to your club. So doing outreach with them, doing a lot of follow-ups to make sure we're getting this out there. and also started doing presentations for clubs as well. So I just had one, I think a week and a half ago with the Student Medical Leadership Program here at UVA. So I got to talk to 60 amazing pre-medical students from disadvantaged groups and kind of share what I've been working on and answer a lot of the questions they're having. So that's another big part of my time. And I think that's one of the more stressful parts of entrepreneurship is actually balancing, there's no structure and there's a million different things you can work on. And I'd actually have a to-do list that has probably like 50 plus items on it to actually accomplish. And so splitting my time between working on the product itself and then working on expanding it. And I don't want, I want to have that out there, but I don't want to also expand so quickly before, so I have people looking at this stuff before it's, kind of half cooked. So it's been a lot, but it's been really fun and awesome to work on it. And again, whenever I'm hearing back from students about how much it's helped them, it's been incredibly gratifying.
Well, congratulations on all the progress that you're making, Paul. Yeah, obviously, as an admissions person, the work that you're doing really speaks to my heart and something that we think a lot about as admissions folks here at Darden. We have a lot of resources for prospective students, blog posts. We have a Spotify playlist that kind of walks through the application process. Do lots of webinars, just trying to provide insights about the application process and just business school in general. Whether it's student conversations like this one on the podcast, webinars, events, just to give people some insight. Because I know it can feel very intimidating if you are the first person perhaps in your family to go to college and you're thinking about graduate school and no one's ever done that. You don't know anybody that's done an MBA. Where do you get started? I like to think that some of the resources that we have can at least get people started. And so it's great to hear about the work that you're doing. Look forward to hearing more about it. I'm curious, Paul, you have any final words of advice, something that you like our prospective student listeners to keep in mind?
Yeah. And I will say, I want to shout out this podcast because I actually remember Brett listening to this like 2 years ago now when I was applying because I was like, I don't know what business school is. So I remember listening to it. And it was funny when you hopped on this call, I could hear your voice. I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember that. So I remember did find the podcast helpful. I think I forgot if there was a certain playlist y'all had, but there was a list of for admissions people, and I think you talked to a few different people from the team. So anyone listening to this should definitely go check that out. It was pretty straightforward. It wasn't super long, so very helpful. But and also, Admissions Academy eventually will be expanding to MBA admissions as well. So I'll be reaching back out in a little bit to see how I can best support you guys over here at Darden. But I would say for students, both applying and once y'all end up dematriculating, I think remembering that business school can be difficult at times, especially Darden, and we kind of pride ourselves almost in being an academically rigorous program, but you will learn a ton. And I think it's for me that at the end of the day, the people are what makes Darden so amazing. The culture that we have of community and support. I'm just continually blown away by all the amazing individuals that I've met. And I also think just giving yourself grace, especially when you're in the thick of recruiting season, have all these interviews and trying to prep for cases and also take care of yourself and your relationships. It can be a lot, but remembering that, again, we're a supportive community. If you show up to class and you didn't fully prep that case, that's okay. You will be okay. And I think just letting yourself try to not feel that intense level of pressure can be really helpful because I think I've seen a lot of peers who put so much pressure on themselves to be perfect on recruiting and perfect in class, and that's just not realistic. There's only 24 hours in a day and we have to use our time accordingly. So just remembering that you know you're going to have a pretty busy few months, and that's okay. And also, like, some people maybe don't get the initial offer they want and they have to, they'll go through recruiting process again in the fall. That's okay too. Darden and any other business school you go to is great. I think Darden's a little bit better, just, maybe a little biased, but you're going to have a great time at school. Just don't forget why you're there. Probably to get a better job and get a more lifestyle that you want, but also to meet a lot of amazing people and take advantage of that. And also talk to professors more. Go to office hours. I never did that, and I really wish I had because professors love to teach here. They want to bend over backwards to help students. And I've had when I started meeting professors, they did so much stuff that was so helpful for me. I just wish I'd started earlier. So even if you don't have anything to talk about, just going and introducing yourself, saying hi. These are people who are some of the best in the world at what they do, and they want to be in your corner. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, I love that advice. I think particularly the advice around career, because when I talk with prospective students, people really do feel like they have to have everything figured out in the first couple months when they're at Darden, because the internship recruiting process starts very early in your first year, and yeah, we do encourage folks to have a good idea of what they want to do and spend some time prior to matriculation engaging with the Career Foundations course, and really try to show up with having done some of that homework so that you have a clearer sense of what you'd like to recruit for, the companies you'd like to connect with. But it's just your first year, and you go to an internship, and maybe you don't love it, and you decide that you want to continue recruiting. You have 2 years in an MBA program, and that's I think sometimes gets a little bit lost. And I always appreciate people mentioning that second year recruiting as part of the career process, because I think sometimes people feel like they have to have everything figured out really quickly, and they have to find an internship that's going to be the full-time job that they want to do, and that's not everybody's journey. And I think you have to keep that in mind. So Paul, thank you for mentioning that, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story.
Of course, I'm really happy to be here. And then, yeah, like you said, Brett, we're all on our own timeline. It's, within business school or anything else in life, it's so easy to compare yourself to other people and say, oh, well, Brett's at this point, I'm over here. But again, it's much easier said than done, but try not to do that. I think taking every day at a time is really helpful. But yeah, I'm really excited really happy to be on here and get a chance to talk to you and share my story. And also, if anyone has any questions specific about the dual degree program, my LinkedIn is Paul Clancy, spelled CLA, and it's November CY number 3. And I'm happy to kind of chat with any of you guys about my experience or any specific questions you have. And if anyone, probably not pre-med students listening to this, but anyone knows a loved one who's going through the pre-medical process, please send them to my LinkedIn or to admissionsacademy.org, and I'm more than happy to help them out and help them reach their dreams of becoming a physician.
Well, you never know. I think we might have some pre-med students, maybe some people thinking about maybe medical school, maybe an MBA. You never know, Paul.
Yeah. Do
So
both. Now they
you can
know.
do both, I hear. So thank you again, and great chatting with you, and good luck with Admissions Academy.
Great. Thanks so much, Brad. I really appreciate it.
And that was my interview with Paul Clancy, an MD MBA student here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.